Hey friends, this is Marilyn from tarotclarity.com, and I thought today would be a great day to flood the internet with messages of hope. And what better coincidence is it that today is Dr. Martin Luther King Day? I don't think it's ever fallen on I think it has fallen on inauguration dates of 3 presidents prior: Reagan, Clinton, and Obama. All 3 of them, it occurred before I had this channel, or I would have said something. I would have spoken about, I would have reminded us all about continuing hope, But today, it's not so much continuing hope, but not to lose hope. There are so many wonderful quotes attributed to Dr. King. One of them being, "Hate cannot drive out hate, only love can do that." And it's an important thing to remember today. And I want to share a personal experience that I had. Now, it was before my husband and I were married. We were married in 2012, and we went to Montgomery, Alabama. My husband's a retired Air Force officer. And there was some function in in Montgomery, Alabama. And we were engaged but not married. And he asked me if I wanted to go along, and I was like, sure. So we drove down with our Chihuahua. It was really good on that trip. It's amazing. It's amazing because he was an ornery little guy, but he was awesome for that trip. He was just so good. And when my husband attended, I guess, whatever it was, classes I think that he did all week, I had the week to myself in Montgomery, Alabama. So I was just like, I love history, So I made it my business to find out everything about Montgomery, Alabama that was worth doing, and I did it. And of course, how could you go to Montgomery, Alabama and not visit the home of Dr. King while he was the Reverend of Dexter Church? And I also went to the church. So there was a bus that would take you to the various spots, and I had to walk, and I of course had very inappropriate shoes on, and my feet were bleeding. They were awful. So I was determined because I really wanted. I saw a lot of things, but those 2 things were the 2 places that I had to go. So I made it to Dr. King's house, and I posted a photograph of the house in my posts, so maybe you'll see it if you look. And I was the only one there. I got there. I was the only person there. And the woman who, I guess, is the curator or the guide, or I'm not sure what her proper title was. But she, I knocked on the door, and she let me in. And I was the only one there. There was no one else there. And she greeted me like I was somebody special, which I couldn't get over. And she told me stories, and she showed me. I went through every room, and in some rooms she just let me sit there by myself without her, and then she totally trusted that I wouldn't do something inappropriate or take something or anything like that, and I imagine, like in any historic facility or place, there's always going to be people who will take advantage and do something like that. So I thought it was a great big leap of faith on her part. However, I'm sure she knows every nook and cranny and everything in that place. So if something was askew or not right, she would have known. But she allowed me to sit in the space of the living room, the kitchen. I touched a salt shaker. She said, "Do you want to touch this?" And I was like, "Yes, oh my God, can I?" And his toaster and his bread box and all the little accoutrements of a kitchen. And she assured me that everything in that house had been used by him and his family. It was it wasn't that little, but it was like a modest weight home with steps. I think it had been bombed while he was there. And it was, I sat there and I took in the environs of the living room, the bedrooms, the kitchen, and I just tried to. I'm one of these kind of people. If I go into a space, I pick it up. I pick up stuff, and it was such an experience. It was just like I felt so much, At any rate, I got into conversation with the woman, and I told her how much I appreciated, being allowed to be there. And while I was there, a gentleman showed up who was part of, I guess, the museum. Part of the museum staff. And they asked me if I wanted to go to the church, Dr. King's church. And I think I thought it was closed. I mean, I don't know that it's ever closed, but maybe during the hours that I would be able to go, it was closed, And I was like, well, I think it's closed, And they were like, we got you. So they made a special phone call to the church. And they said, we're sending, a woman down. And would you let her in? So that, and they saw that, the woman saw that my feet were like bleeding and everything, and that my feet were in terrible condition. And she asked her friend who showed up, can you take her? Can you take her to the church? So I didn't even have to, walk to the next corner and hop a bus, So I think it was like a big yellow Cadillac. I think it was yellow. A big yellow Cadillac. It was so cool. And I hop in his car, and he takes me to the church. And the person there very graciously allowed me to enter. And now, I didn't take photographs inside the house because I don't believe I was allowed to. And I'm not a rule breaker. I didn't try to sneak any photographs or anything like that. I took pictures of the outside of the house. And but I didn't get any on the inside, but like it's in my head, So he takes me to the church. The gentleman, I think it was a gentleman inside, allows me in. And I was allowed to take photographs of like the pulpit and the pews and but there was this magnificent mural on the lower level that I was not allowed to take photographs of. And he took me through, the mural and the significance of it and all the events that it portrayed. And again, like when I was in the pews and I was like looking at the pulpit, and I was just rushed with emotion, and I think I told my husband that it was one of the most religious, spiritual experiences of my life. And this occurred before I had my YouTube channel, or I surely would have spoken about it on YouTube, but I put it on my Facebook page. I shared whatever photographs I had and the experience of what it felt like and how amazing it was. So if any of you are friends with me on Facebook, if you go back to March of 2012, you will find photographs and whatever commentary I had at that period of time. In fact, I should have gone back and looked at it myself just to remember some of the comments that I made. And it was it was just one of the most profound experiences of my life. That one of those things that I take with me to my grave. That was just amazing. At any rate, at the end of the day, the gentleman, he didn't wait for the gentleman with the yellow Cadillac. He had things to do, so he couldn't wait for me. And I was allowed to take my time. I was the only one. I was the only person that was in the house, and I was the only person that had entry to the church. In fact, the church was closed. It was closed to everyone else. I was the only one that was allowed in it at that time. And I, when I was done, I said, "Thank you very much." And then from the church, I had to walk to the bus, and I took the bus and I got off the stop where my husband, well, he wasn't my husband, we weren't married yet, but where my fiance and I agreed to meet prior, which I think was a fountain, was at a fountain, which was, I think, like put up in a location where I think, slaves had been sold on that spot. I guess a fountain is kind of like cleansing, or, so maybe that was the purpose for why they had a fountain there now. And he saw me with my feet. He asked me what went on, and I told him everything. And he's like, "You got into a man's car?" It's like, "You got into a man's car?" It was like, I felt no fear at all. I felt no fear. My radar senses can have gotten better through the years. I've made some bad choices, and I've had some unfortunate experiences, but this was not one that I had any second doubts about. And it was just, I was like, yeah. And he still teases me. He says, "You got into a man's car." I was like, yeah. But anyway, it was just a joyous experience. And if any of you ever have the opportunity to go through Montgomery, Alabama, to see the home and the church, and we saw Rosa Parks' bus. That was, outside. It was outside. I think it was outside over underneath like some kind of structure to keep it from the elements, I think we were allowed on the bus too. We were allowed to get up on the bus. It was like a little, I'm pretty sure, either that or we were able to look in, but I can't recall if we were allowed on the bus or not. But it was there, the Rosa Parks bus. And I believe in the house, it was where he, maybe in the church too, where I think he held a rally, or he held a meeting for, organizing the boycott of the public transportation in the 50s. Anyway, if you ever have an opportunity to go through Montgomery, Alabama, stop and take a look, and to honor the great Dr. Martin Luther King. And I hope multiple people today will take the opportunity to flood the internet with reminders that it hasn't always been easy for a lot of people. And there are always some people who rise above and give hope. I believe Dr. King was, I don't want to say the word, but he met his death in, I think, 1968. I was about 10 years old. And I grew up, I was born in the 50s, but I was raised in the 60s. I was born in the 50s, raised in the 60s. And I was witness to a lot of stuff at a very impressionable age. There was civil rights, there was peace, love, and Bobby Sherman, and there was some, we had, not to the extent at all that Black Americans had. But my father was Spanish. His father was from Spain, so we had a Spanish surname. And I remember that the neighborhood had a problem with us. Now, we moved into a home that my architect grandfather built for us, okay? It was the newest home on the street. Both of my parents were college educated. None of my friends' parents on that street had educations. Not that there's anything wrong with that, but it's not like we were WT moving on that block. If anything, we would have elevated it, right? In fact, not only did both my parents have college educations, my father had 2 master's degrees, and the home was built by a reputable Philadelphia architect who just took the opportunity to build a home for my mother. And people moved, I remember, moved from our street because they felt like WT was moving in because we had a Spanish surname. And now my mother was Italian, full. I can't imagine my mother had anything else in her except Italian. I've done my own DNA, and it seems like all the Italian stuff that I got came from her, and a little bit from my father's mother, but most of it all came from my mother's people. Whenever there's a little bit of French or Portuguese, that came from my dad. So I remember, in recent memory, I'm 66 years old, so in recent living memory, being a time where a person might not be white enough. Okay? Not white enough. And when we hear MAGA, I have to ask, well, when exactly was that? Because in my memory, we still weren't white enough. So it's a scary thought. I apologize for the room heater. It's like 10 degrees outside. It's really cold. And we have a little bit of snow on the ground, and this room is northern exposure. So I apologize. Let me pause until this ends. I apologize because I don't really remember exactly where I was when I paused for the heater. But I can only speak from my own experience, being a small child growing up, remembering that people were moving, and we were lucky. We were lucky. Even though it felt hurtful, we were lucky because the people who hated us moved, right? How many families moved into neighborhoods where they were forced out, or their homes were bombed or put on fire, like Dr. King, right? So we were we were lucky, It was a matter of we weren't white enough, And that was a reaction to my father's surname. But even Italian people weren't white enough not too many years before, in my mother and father's lifetime. Which is why, I'm not even going to get into all of this, but was why, Columbus Day was declared a national holiday in 1892 for one day, not as an annual event, but it was named a national holiday 1 year after 11 Italians were lynched in New Orleans for a crime that none of them were convicted of doing. Some of them were hanged after, or shot, or what, I forget how they were taken out. Some of them, after they were acquitted, were killed, and the others that hadn't even gone to trial yet were killed because it was a hate crime of the culture. We weren't seen as Caucasian. So I'm just putting it out there that just because you're Caucasian doesn't mean you're Caucasian enough for certain individuals. I'm not saying. But history can sometimes repeat itself if you're not careful. And it seems that we need to heed. And especially for those who are most at risk. And for those of us who are no longer at risk, just remember that in the not too distant past, we were. So, fill your heart with love, flood the internet with hashtag MLK, you know, and let's do our part to ensure that I'm speechless. That we just focus on love and doing the right thing when we have the opportunity to. Until next time, friends. Peace, stay well, and be kind.